Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another week. Out the week's flying, Ben. Out the week's flying. So,
They are very much
yeah,
so.
it's absolutely mad. And um, hopefully it's going out. We are very, very close, if not past it. Our event, first time we've done it in May. May the 4th be with you.
Yes.
Thanks to all our partners. Thanks to everybody that's been involved. Lots of conversations going on. And we are a couple of tickets away from capacity. I didn't
Yep.
think we'd make it. And
No.
thanks to everybody that signed up. Let's be honest, it's tough to get out of schools and everything else. And no, we really appreciate the community for coming along to our first face-to-face event since COVID. And
Yep.
the world hasn't changed. People want to still do face-to-face, Ben.
For
So
sure.
yeah, we're excited. So thanks to Signing Up, Protocol, and all of our other award sponsors. I really appreciate everybody coming together and excited for a couple of events. Ben, hopefully you'll drink some beer rather than some Red Bull.
Well, who knows? I might treat myself to both, and
yeah,
and
just
be,
on
be
that,
punching the air and.
we've got enough pizza to literally feed a herd of elephants, and we've got free beer when people turn up, and wine or whatever your tipple is if you're a non-drinker. We've got some tap water for you, or as we call it in Yorkshire, council pop. So it's there, or you might even have a glass of Coke. Who knows? But another week gone by. I've been in and out of Dublin this week, flown over to meet some customers and everything else, and the rest of it's just been a bit of a blur, if I'm honest. It's been a bit of a whirlwind. I don't even know what I've done this week, but I've definitely left this room, which is always a positive end to the week. Sometimes I leave the house to put the bins out on an early Thursday morning, but I've been
Treat
beyond
yourself.
that.
Treat yourself.
Yeah, I've gone beyond that this week. So, but yeah,
Love
it's
it.
been good. It's been good. We even can we talk about it? We were interviewed this morning, Ben, weren't we?
Yeah, we
We
can
won't
talk
say the
about it.
publication and everything else,
Yeah.
but we're interviewed by a magazine that's going to be published, and we haven't had a date yet around the future of AI, the impact it's having on education, or will have trends, talking about how we can embrace it rather than push it back and reflect it. If that's the right word, to know that so many are and embrace it, I think. But Ben, how's your week been?
Yeah, week's been good. That interview was brilliant. It was just nice to be able to chew the fat, I think. And we've been talking about this almost feels like in an echo chamber sometimes. But for somebody asking us where we think it's going, the impact that it's having, and how to deal with parents, and as a parent myself who's navigating this with his 12-year-old daughter, yeah, it was good to talk at that. So yeah, week's been good. Other than that, we've been working on I'm going to tell this, and maybe I shouldn't, but at the event on next Thursday, we said that we were going to do something a little bit different. One of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving every person who attends a copy of our trends booklet. So we've been looking at things that have been on the horizons, the weak signals of the future of education. So some of the guests that we're on, we've got some nice quotes in there. So we've done this nice fancy printed thing, like analog. We've actually gone analog to print a booklet that's going to go, and everybody's going to get a hold of that next week. So I've been working hard on that. With the team have been working hard on that. We've been writing some nice stuff and designing that up, which has been good fun. Yeah, and I've been working on the stuff for the Digital Marketing Academy that I do some work with. Been filming, day filming, some editing, bits of stuff like that. Yeah, good fun. And outside of my window, we've got some scaffolding because we are having some building work done. So it is late enough in the evening for them not to be banging anything, which is nice. But yeah, it's good. It feels like summer's coming. We've been a bit sad that we aren't on holiday, because any very regular guest will know that Ben likes to go on holiday. Feels like it's every other month we get to go somewhere, which is we're very fortunate to. But yeah, it looks like the summer's coming, and we can kind of see the end of the road for the building. So yeah, it's been good. It's one of those. It's been one of those weeks, but next week is probably going to be top it all off, isn't it? So anybody who hasn't got a ticket and you listen to this in time, you're probably not. Or if you're lastminute.com and you've got a few quid in your pocket and you want to decide you want to buy a ticket or treat somebody, uprising.edufuturists.com, you might as well go and see if there's any tickets left. There might be, there might not be. But we very much look forward to those who are joining us coming along. And if you're from the US, like our guest this evening, if you're from the US and you're sad that you can't come, well, who knows? Maybe next year will be Edufuturist Uprising US edition. That would be the that's the dream. So let's see if we can get some stuff happening over there.
Yeah. And I was going to flash up the merch. I won't. I'm going to save it for the night.
Yeah,
So
save the merch.
clothing and
It's
the
cool
branding.
though, isn't it? It's cool.
Yeah, it's nice to wear the Edufuturists. I'm gonna look like Joey Tribbiani in the episode of Friends where I'm wearing everything Edufuturist, and it looks like is it Porsche or Ferrari, and it looks like Porsche has literally thrown up on him. I'm gonna look like the Edufuturist podcast has thrown up on me. I'm gonna wear everything Edufuturist. I might even wear some Edufuturist socks one day. Who knows?
Whoa! Wow, that would be revolution.
I am wearing socks every now and again, just so everybody knows. I am heavily in marathon training season. I have picked up a slight injury. I'm concerned. I'm 2.5 weeks out, and I've picked up a knee injury.
There's always a new injury. That's what you get when you get into your 40s, I suppose.
Not just yet, but I'm wearing socks for my running. So maybe I'll pick that up. I'm nursing the injury. I did 21.5 miles on Sunday, and I've got to do 23 this week. I'm sure I'll carry it through this close. And our guest has just dropped out.
Maybe he doesn't agree with you running marathons.
Maybe I'll just have to carry on. Maybe it's just going to be me and Ben tonight. Who knows? We've never gone live and everything else, but hopefully, I'm concerned that he's getting itchy behind the scenes, and he's going to leave permanently at some point if we don't bring him in soon enough. So let's go to that. I'll stop talking. The thing about I'll upset some people tonight. How do you know if people are vegan? They tell you. How do you know if somebody's a runner? They definitely tell you. All I talk about is running, my children, and EdTech. Anything else, if anybody hears me, I'm probably drunk or something because I'm just not being myself. But anyway, we'll bring our guest in. We'll let them introduce himself, and we're really looking forward to the episode. I think we're going to deep dive into some really cool stuff tonight. So without further ado, we'll bring in Kim.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be. I just read an article the other day that there's going to be a real issue when we have people on Mars and the moon and trying to get the time zones synced up. So if we think we're having fun now, wait until we've got somebody up in the skies, and then we're really going to be messed up on what time zone it is. But glad to be here.
What time zone even is that?
Well, exactly. Is it lunar time, or who knows? Nobody will ever get to sleep again. That'll be the end of it.
Definitely. So, do you want to introduce yourself? What through for those guests that might not be our guests, our listeners, and our watchers? What through? Tell us a bit about yourself, your history, and why you're on.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Well, let's start with the last question first. I firmly believe that we've been amiss in not rebuilding our education model for at least the last 50 years. So that's why I'm involved. I'm adamant that we need vast improvement, and it needed to have occurred yesterday, but here we are. My background, any of you that want to reach out to me and connect with me via LinkedIn, please do so. I'm always ready for a conversation. But I have an interestingly eclectic mix, I believe, of both the corporate sector, the small business sector, and then, of course, academia. And it became very apparent to me 7 years ago, and actually even prior to that, most of this technology can track itself all the way back to the 60s, that utilization of advanced personalized technology in support of an individual's ability to learn and retain knowledge, and retention is a big deal for me, has been woefully ignored. And so what's occurred in the last year, as we're all aware, we suddenly have some remarkably interesting tool sets that can be added to some of the tool sets that we've already had in motion for a while. And suddenly we have one heck of a powerful educational tool system. And that's what I'm interested in. I want to make sure that as we move forward rapidly and start really educating people instead of just teaching them how to pass a test.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that super resonates with who we are and teaching to the test. And I know we're going to get into this conversation around grading and what that looks like. We'll probably come to that a little bit later down the conversation. What I will say to the listeners who are just listening on a podcast channel, thank you for doing that and for clicking subscribe. But if you haven't done and you are just listening, Kim's likely to to refer to some images that he talks about. So we will put them in the show notes. We'll be able to put them in the newsletter as well, for those people who are interested in that. But if not, jump onto YouTube and you'll be able to see that, because we are going to share some of the graphics as we go. So looking forward to this conversation, Kim. And obviously your background and your passion there is about reforming the education system. You've the title around this futurist and this thinking around educational future, and then this idea about the EdTech research that you do, so to make sure that this is grounded not just in a theory, or grounded in somebody's oh, that looks nice, and that shiny new toy, and that shiny new tool. You actually saying this needs to be founded in research that says this can make a difference in education.
Absolutely. And one of the projects that I'm working on right now is, if the audience isn't familiar with Bloom's 2 Sigma problem, I highly encourage you to do a quick Google and read up on it. Benjamin Bloom in the 1980s was looking at a variety of different techniques in which the student performance would increase significantly. And he stumbled upon one in which the 2 major changes in the relationship with the learner. One of them, it was highly personalized, even though at that time it was analog and personality based. The other was a mastery requirement. So mastery requirement says there's no such thing as a grade. Either you know this material or you don't. And then the last was individual tutoring. And individual tutoring is a series of human intervention components that would kick in order to enable the learner to be successful. At the end of the day, the reason it's called Benjamin Bloom's 2 Sigma problem is that the performance increase was 2 sigma, sometimes even larger in terms of effectiveness. But the reason he described it as a problem is because at that time there was no financial way to be able to support such a highly personalized environment. And here we are, and we have, thank you. I'm sorry, you're reading my mind. Here we are, and now we have advanced technologies that can make this happen. And so, and once again, any of you that are not familiar with Benjamin Bloom's work, I highly recommend you take a look at it. But the project that I'm currently engaged with is we're going to come back and revisit Benjamin Bloom with advanced artificial intelligence, augmented adaptive learning technology, and see what the delta is today between a traditional classroom and a technology enhanced environment. Ben, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the graphic called AI bolt-on. Here's where I believe we've gone astray. Let's go back one. Oh, keep going. Oh, this is fun. I have a slideshow. Hey, I am somebody. There. Keep going. Oh, sorry. You had I may have been the very first slide. My apologies to the audience for this. We'll get there. There we go. Go back one, 2. It's the one with the red copy. Okay. So at the end of the day, the real issue that has not only been identified by Benjamin Bloom in the 80s, once again, but subsequently in numerous research studies, is the whole idea of the teacher being the sage on the stage just does not work. It assumes a number of things. And one of the most important things it assumes is that the student population that this teacher is standing in front of, whether it's 8, 10, 15, 30, or in the old days of the lecture hall at the college level, 90 to 100, is that all of the students are the same. Fundamental premise issue, number 1. Second, as these AI and ALT systems are coming online, there is a reluctance and almost insistence that these technologies be plugged into that traditional classroom. And so what this graphic depicts right now is that you've got these traditional, even remote environment, even though remote can be synchronous or asynchronous or a little bit of both, they're basically using the same problematic model, one teacher to many students. And all they're doing is trying to plug this technology into that existing classroom, whether it's virtual or physical. The same thing occurs in distance learning class. So what my field of research is looking at is, all right, if the fundamental premise of one teacher to many students model is dysfunctional, being polite here, uh, then what does it begin to look like if you fully begin to actualize these technologies to their greatest import? So if we take a look let's click through a slide or two, and then I'll let you interject, because I don't want to just be talking the whole time here. Let's go forward a couple slides. And okay, so one of the other issues that we've learned over the last 10 years or so is that the first generation of these adaptive learning technology systems did an interesting job in allowing students to breeze through, if you will, content that they were already very well adapted to. They already knew it. Maybe they'd been playing with it for a while. And so this graphic represents the blue character being able to jump to chapter 4. The black icon is just pacing through the individual steps. The red icon is basically blasting through chapter 2 and then all the way to the end of the class. What these systems did was simple pre-testing or pre-evaluation of the students so that they could take these channels. But this identifies the third problem of the existing classroom, and it's that this might represent a 12-week class. So what do these students do in between? So what this technology has done is it's identify a bunch of glaring holes in the existing system that we need to begin to really wrap our minds around how AI can fix those.
So I'm hearing this. Sorry, Steve. I know I've jumped in front of you. Just let me just have this just from that chart that I can see in front of me there. I can see for those people who are listening, there's a pathway between chapters 1 to 6, and then the blue pathway is where somebody jumps straight to chapter 4 and then works their way through. The black pathway is where people go from chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sequentially, and then the red one is somebody jumps to chapter 2 and then can jump straight to the end because of the nature of how they understand it. And I think from a concept around adaptive learning, for those listeners who are like backwards, that's what the word I'm thinking to go backwards is what I'm saying, not the people are backwards. Sorry, everyone who's listening to that, who's offended. Steve's laughing his head off if anybody's listening. I didn't mean you're backwards. I mean, if we take a step backwards, the concept around adaptive learning is that it shouldn't just be a one size fits all. We've mentioned in the podcast, we mentioned in the newsletters. Daniel Susskind uses a phrase that says in his book, The Future of Work, that says one size fits all actually means one size fits none. And so it's this idea that adaptive learning is adapting the learning for the individual learners. That's the basic premise of it. Is that right, Kim?
Yes, and what we begin to understand is, and it seems to be a point of discussion with academics across the board. I'm rather astounded by it, but the identified very early, believe it or not, people have.
It seems like Kim's dropped out. Maybe his internet's is playing up. But Steve, it's interesting as we're talking around this, is that there's. Oh, he's back. You're interesting that we're talking about this idea.
We go back into it. How to make friends and alien people. Let's call them backward. Like literally. Oh my god, I was laughing made up. I didn't unmute myself because Ben was in full flow. I didn't want to break the fact that he was apologising to all our listeners. Please stay with us. Please come back this week and next week and continue. Ben wasn't calling you backwards. He clearly has rectified his error. But for those people who are not watching visually, I'm just listening, I was behind the scenes laughing my head off at the comment and literally Ben trying to defend. But Kim's back with us. We lost you for a second there, Kim.
Yeah, don't you love the 21st century? Once again, the 24th stuff might actually work. So, one of the things that we're looking at through my research strategies is the whole idea of knowledge mapping. And a knowledge map shouldn't just be what you know. It should also be a representation of your talents, your abilities, your interests. All those should come into play to rounding you out as the educated person that we know that you can be. And so you take that knowledge map, and some of the representations that we've been experimenting with are actually visual representations. They're three-dimensional models that show different aspects of how your personal knowledge levels are interconnected. I had used previously before the show the analogy of mathematics and music being highly integrated that we don't do today in a siloed environment. And then we can use that map in conjunction with some AI analysis and really beginning to map out an educational program in front of you that better matches your personality, your interests, your strengths, and once again, your weaknesses. So to your point, Ben, the whole idea of one size fits all, I would argue never did work. But more importantly, as we've entered this 21st century, it's glaringly apparent that it can't work.
Yeah, just on that, I think it's been really successful. And correct me, please, if I'm way off the mark. The whole project-based learning, phenomenon-based learning in Finland, where it's based on context and application around whole project-based. So they might learn about mathematics and all these different things, but it's based on a subject that's familiar, something that is a passion, and that has been so successful. I was speaking to an educator leader. And I can't mention what sector and everything else because it might give the game away and I don't want to offend anybody. But they said, oh, yeah, you're talking about Finland and that model, but it's not as successful as it should be, really. And all, they're not in the top 2 anymore. And I said, okay, from what aspect are you thinking about it? Well,
from what measure? Right.
From being measured and grades and everything else. I said, well, let's just have a conversation about that. I said, if you ask people in Finland whether it's successful, they might have a different opinion, whether it's working or not. And I haven't spoken to a Finnish person around it. But ultimately, their judgment on whether the system is working is not based on the English system and many systems where they're saying, oh, we're getting more people passing grades and top grades and everything else. Their thing is it creating holistic learners? Is it creating a rounded learner that can apply to context and all these different things? Because if we're judging things in the way that England is, many systems that are successful in their eyes might not work. I love the model. I've seen it in action when I've been over there, and Sweden and some of the Nordic countries are really doing some great work around it. It can work, and it can work really, really well. It doesn't take a seismic shift and a reinvention particularly. It takes some iteration of it and a bit of a revolution at times. And also the funding stream doesn't significantly have to change. It's just us thinking differently and of how we apply and what we expect and expect learners to actually produce back to us, I think, rather than just putting our hands up and answering questions. I think that's a problem that many systems, and again, maybe I'm off mark, but that's what you've just said, I think, can be done, is done, and is done well if we want it to happen.
I wholeheartedly agree. I'll key on 2 of your points there. First of all, the measure system that they're utilizing to say that this isn't working is not a measure. It's like you have a bottomless cup and then you keep pouring stuff in and people are wondering why nothing's accumulating, right? In fact, this is a challenge to the audience at large, to the planet at large. Somebody tell me what a C student means, because I don't know what that means. Does that mean they only got half the material? And if so, which half? Can you tell me what we need to do to improve the performance of this student? And the odds are you probably can't, because you only have, once again, 16 weeks to do it in, or 12 weeks, or whatever it may be. And in response to your second point, I asked just before the show, I asked ChatGPT what an education person is. What is the definition? So I'll spend just a second. It's a short sentence. According to ChatGPT, an educated person is someone who has the ability to navigate the world with a broad range of knowledge and skills, and who has developed a capacity to learn, adapt, and grow throughout their life. I have a hard time arguing with that.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that sounds like a good definition.
Yeah. And so to your second point, Steve, what do we want to consider a person attainment of education and knowledge? Do we need critical thinkers? Do we need people with collaboration skills? Do we need people who know how to conceptualize and do predictive analysis on success of how they might be able to approach a problem? Or do we want somebody that passes tests? And that's where we're at, is the latter. It's not getting us we're not moving forward as a species at the light speed that I know we can by being hamstrung by this system.
I agree. And speaking from I suppose, an American point of view, but applying it to the context of global, is the difference, I suppose, between GPA and GCA. And to kind of explain what I mean by both is and I might absolutely murder this for the American audience. So GPA is like grade point average.
Yes.
It's an average of how you've done in your tests and your assessments, and then that's how you judged and how you apply and get onto the next level. Whereas GCA, general cognitive ability, and there are many organisations, and I actively recruit based on GCA. I did it when I was in education in terms of when I was employing new staff, and I do it now, where I look at the rounded individual and look at leadership and look at their cognitive ability, their ability to analyze and to be critical thinkers and all these different things. And we talk about it on a regular basis that the education system in many countries is focused on GPA, but really, like that definition, what we really need in terms of an educated person is somebody that has an understanding, but also has GCA.
But Steve,
I think, yeah,
Steve, just to throw into that before we bring Kim in on that, I think like surely, just to play devil's advocate, and this is not like me either, because you know what I'm like around this rounded element. And does GPA not open the door for GCA? So as in you filter out. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, but in our world now, for instance, if you want somebody to become a developer or to become a teacher, there's a boundary that says they must have a degree or they must have this level of qualification. So does GCA not then help to wheedle that out? Is it not just for ease of use?
I would say GPA is an indication, but I wouldn't say it's based on. So, for example, if you take some of the big tech companies, Google, AWS, Amazon, and you take Microsoft, they all look at a one-page application that you do not need to be a computer scientist. It is desirable, but ultimately, if you are a computer scientist and you have a degree, but you are somebody who's done a course and you've taken loads of different micro credentials, as long as you can apply that knowledge into a context and you can do a certain level, then ultimately, if you can put that onto one page in terms of what your accolades are, some of your qualification, great. But if somebody says, "Hi, I have a computer science degree," ultimately, I would bring them in, regardless of whether they're a 2-1, 2-2 in terms of the degree grading system in the UK, and all of the testing would be around application of their knowledge. So ultimately, is it a benchmark? But ultimately, I would take somebody without a degree for computer science that can apply all of their knowledge through shorter learning without actually any formal qualification over somebody who has a formal qualification. Me personally, and the big tech companies are doing it because what does a piece of paper, and we said, what is the difference between a C? What does a computer science degree? I have a PE degree. Like, imagine if my qualifications were the be all and end all of getting a job, I'd be a PE teacher still. Where actually I've met the skills and the application of context in my GCA or luck, I don't know, have got me into this position of the work I do now and everything else. So I would say it can be a benchmark. I think we need to find a medium between. But my worry is that we are so focused on the assessment and the grading, we forget that when we employ people, we're not developing that they could create a website, they could do all this wonderful stuff. But as a computer scientist, sometimes you have to work with other people and they do not have that ability. They cannot work to a brief. They can't do all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, so let's have a look at maybe somebody that might be number 2 or number 3 based on their qualifications. They far outweigh people because they can do what I need them to do in terms of my industry and the work. Does that explain it? I think we just need to not just focus on GPA because I think we're missing some wonderful individuals by just looking at, can they pass a test?
Well, absolutely. And once again, what is that C student? I don't think any of us should ignore the fact that folks like Google and Microsoft have now eliminated the need for degrees for some of what they call their entry-level positions because they intend to train them. I myself personally am not happy with the idea that corporate structures might take over education. I don't think that's where we want to go as a society. But we seem to be marching in that direction because many of these large corporate structures are not seeing what they want to see. And the whole idea of collaboration, if you think about it philosophically, the grade system itself is contrary to collaboration, because you want to be the best in the class. You don't care about anybody else. There's nobody else in the room that is of concern to you, because the only thing you're focused on is, I want that grade. And so then they enter the real world, where collaboration is more important than individual high performance, and suddenly they don't know how to cope. Ben, let's move forward with a slide. I'll tell you when to pause. I don't know how much of a delay. There we go. That one. Because I think this is key to part of our conversation. This is what a model begins to look like in a AI augmented adaptive learning technology model. It doesn't look like a classroom. The learner is doing a lot of independent research. In fact, I tell folks that in a fully AI-enabled world, research is key. You want these individuals to go exploring different avenues of thought. Maybe you channel them, maybe you control them to a certain extent, but if they can start developing insights and interconnectedness in their own minds, they're going to retain that knowledge a lot more effectively than if you make them memorize something. We look at mastery of objectives. I mean, there is no such thing as a B algebra 1. I pick on algebra 1 a lot. Student, either you know it or you don't. And some students might take 6 weeks to figure it out, and other students may take 2 years. At the end of the day, who cares? As long as they understand it. And then certainly collaboration is one heck of a powerful tool. It's how it got us from the hunter-gatherer age to here. I don't think it's anything that we should choose to ignore moving forward. And then I really want related fields. So, in such a model, and I'll elaborate just another moment longer, but in such a model, then if the AI is assisting in basically most of the instructional technique, what do the teachers do? I would propose that teachers are engaged in ways that brought them to be teachers in the beginning, to provide enthusiasm and an insight and excitement and just the whole joy of learning. That's what human teachers do best. Let the AI throw out the bits and the bytes and the textbooks, and let the humans go back to being humans. In fact, after this call, I'll email you a chat that I had with GPT regarding the role of humans versus AI in a fully AI automated society. And it's rather eye-opening. It's rather interesting, actually.
So in terms of this mastery element, where do you see, what do you see from that in terms of why do you think we should focus on mastery then?
Well, I think, would readily admit the whole idea of grading is useless, I hope. You could argue, how emotionally tied to grading you are or not. But mastery says that, once again, either you know it or you don't. And if you don't, then what do we need to do to correct that? Once again, I'll pick on algebra 1. Maybe you missed a critical element at the very beginning of this educational system. So let's go back and revisit that. There should be no problem with that. In the existing model, where you're going through the 6 chapters 1 week right after the other, and which, by the way, many textbook manufacturers carve up their chapters of their textbooks to match the sequence of events in the school. So if it's a 15-week class, it's a 15-chapter book. If it's a 16, it's a 16-week chapter book. It's really relatively simple and blatantly absurd from my eyes. But what is the goal of taking algebra 1? It's to learn algebra 1. It's not to fail it. It's not to get a C in it. It's to learn it, to master it. And so in answer to your query, the whole idea of mastery has to be tied to the obsolescence of the timeline as well. Otherwise, why are we even teaching this? If it's okay to have 40% of the students walk away with a C, haven't we wasted a lot of time and money?
Yeah, is a short answer. And I think when you said that about mastery being about whether somebody gets it or they don't get it, it's about that granular level as well, isn't it? It's about being able to break down an issue or a topic into its component parts and be able to see very clearly what it is that they're not getting, rather than just they don't get algebra 1. It may well just be one element part of it. And this is where we've got some friends, I say friends, they're partners with friends of the podcast, partners with us for the Edufuturists Awards next week, learning by questions, and actually some of the stuff that they do at Century Tech as well that we're familiar with is basically breaking down some of the component elements and actually saying, let's drill those bits.
Right.
Because if you can get those little bits right, then actually you might be able to fix algebra 1, rather than just saying let's just keep repeating the whole thing. And that's the problem with this mainstream one size fits all, fully 30 people in a classroom all doing the same thing in the same direction
At the same time.
At the same time, that whole idea around that we're going to get to in terms of timelines as well, that's a huge issue, because there'll be it's the little things that we don't get. So Steve used to play football a little bit. By football I mean soccer, and I'm guessing Steve's a big lad, so I'm guessing he was quite good at heading. And obviously he's not got right much hair up front of his head as well, so he probably did a lot of heading of the football, and it probably explains a little bit why he can't get his words out. But I imagine he's probably got one foot that's weaker than the other. Yeah, he's not in the background.
Absolutely factual. Absolutely, yeah, spot on. Yeah.
So in terms of his rounded approach, he either needs to get really good at using his right foot, or realistically probably needs to do some work on bits of things with his left foot, so that he's got that on his skill set, so that he becomes round and says, actually, well, he's a footballer who can use both feet. And that's just I know that's a silly example, but from a learning perspective, we have to break down to components rather than just saying big picture thinking.
I agree, absolutely. And to that point, and I'm paraphrasing Carl Sagan here because I don't remember his quote exactly, but it was something to the effect that if you want to see how humans actually learn, watch a bunch of kindergartners playing, because it's not single-threaded. They're learning together. Their eyes are being opened, not maybe simultaneously, but eventually they all begin to see things in a similar light. And that causes me to think, well, if you're going to use those kind of analogies, then how did we, each and every one of us, learn to ride a bicycle? It wasn't in a classroom. It wasn't with 30 other people, with somebody sitting at the front of the room saying, well, make sure you maintain your balance. There's certain things that we're good at. And one of the things that I think differentiates us as a species, there's probably a lot, is our curiosity. And when you have such a highly regimented, controlled, traditional class environment, curiosity goes out the window. And I think that's, if we can reignite that curiosity, then the students begin to understand why Algebra 1 is fun, why it's exciting, rather than the drudgery of failing it and then having to take it again in university and again, and university and again. University ad infinitum, unfortunately. Let's go forward just a little bit in the slides. I'm keeping my eye on the clock here. We're doing okay, I think. But I'm curious. Let's keep going.
I just to touch on that point, we discussed it this morning when we were being interviewed for the magazine. Curiosity. I was saying. We need to get away from the statement of curiosity killed the cat. Curiosity is a wonderful thing, and just that kind of jokey thing about it makes it sound like a bad thing, a negative thing. Be curious. My daughter's at 2.5, and she's at that stage of everything is why. Mm-hmm. Everything is why. And as frustrating as it is, I was like, at times I'm like, I'd like to not be asked why for the 55th time of why she can't have a lolly. But at the same point, I'm like, if we move that away from it, it's always just a case of just yes or no, and taking facts from what we say as kind of the correct, but it doesn't take a thought process of let me just explore that of why you're saying that. I find it fascinating. We want curiosity, because that's what creates innovation. That's what creates next steps and developments. And like, if people weren't curious about, which we joked about Mars and space and everything else. People climb Everest. People do this because they're curious.
Right.
Curiosity is research. Curiosity is new things, is development. Without curiosity, the world is mundane and boring, and we don't develop anything new. We just stay as we are. Innovation is curiosity, in my opinion.
I agree. Without curiosity, I think we're an extinct species, because that's our claim to fame. That's how we crawled out of the savannah and began putting robots on Mars. Which, by the way, what's the joke? What's the only planet in the solar system that's populated entirely by robots? Mars. Let's go forward just a little bit, Ben, and because I want to keep going. And if there's any interest in these slides, you're welcome to distribute them. They don't have any explanatory copy, unfortunately, but I think the intent, yeah, we can keep going. Keep going. We're getting close. I feel it. There we go. Stop right there. So you'd asked me what kind of research was in motion. This is what I refer to quite arrogantly as the Gordon model. But the more we began to look at how these adaptive learning technology systems augmented with AI could be implemented in a wholly re-engineered or rebuilt education model, it begins to look something like this. And I'm not proposing that this is the model, but it is a talking point. We put that learner dead center. So what we're looking at here is a graphic with 9 distinct elements to it. And the learner is element number 1. And they have an adaptive learning technology layer that basically is their interface to human instructors. And I always use the word instructors, because human instructors, there could be dozens in this networked world that we need to start taking advantage of that can be supporting this learner. And then they have a personalized, dedicated AI. I call it a teaching assistant because the idea of calling it a teacher is objectionable to many people. So I call it a teaching assistant. And then item 4 is something called the mastery engine. And this is an area that I've got 2 small projects in motion. But if you think about how we got to where we're at with ChatGPT, it basically was fed the internet at large, to oversimplify it. And so ChatGPT really doesn't know what's real and what's not real, what's fiction, what's true, what's lies. One of the things that we're looking very closely at is the number, and there's dozens, if not hundreds of these, of paywall restricted research libraries. Those libraries need to be broke open and added to an education system so that we are not dealing with the internet Wild West at large accumulation of information, but we are dealing with peer-reviewed, validated, research experimented information. Then the student, I think, should always be supported with subject matter educational experts. In the event that the learner is having some kind of an issue, there's an expert out there on the planet somewhere that can step in, or maybe it's an AI. And then a variety of exterior interfaces and some other collaborative environments, including an empathy model. Because what should education do? It shouldn't only teach them STEM, it should teach them how to be a good person, in my view.
So we have had Saugata Mitra on the podcast a couple of times. He's kindly coming to our event. Well, he's coming to our event next week. He won our Outstanding Achievement Award last year, and you're probably familiar with Saugata's work in terms of like the hole in the wall experiment. But
Yep.
he talked to us about. He believes the future of education is students will have 4 teachers. So the teacher, the physical teacher, which actually could probably be multiple educators like you're talking about there. He says the student themselves is a teacher because they are, because that self-learning, that curiosity stuff that you talked about as well. He mentioned the external expert that comes in, whether that's a whether that's a subject matter educational expert or an exterior interface or something like that.
Or
And then
maybe some emotional support, whatever it takes, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And then the fourth one is the machine. In regards to what that machine looks like, he's saying that each student will have 4 teachers at some level, and I really like this idea of how it's a similar in model to what you're talking about here, in terms of that the idea that what we are trying to do is create a model where learners have got access to a variety of authorities, whatever authority means. They themselves are an authority that helps them come to some level of understanding in a way that works for them, and that's what I'm hearing here.
Exactly.
It's that young people are. They might not always know what they need to know, because we don't. Steve says all the time, we don't know what we don't know. But sometimes, and that's why it needs an external expert sometimes, or external educator, teacher to come in and go, this is the bit you're missing. This is a little tweak. And the best teachers, I think about my experiences of teachers and in teaching, when I've got it right, I feel like it's going, do you know what? I'm going to look at the little thing that's going to unlock this, that one little thing. If you understood the idea of the hedonic calculus in utilitarianism, if you understood the hedonic calculus, that would explain all of this, and you'd be able to do it all. And that's what I think we're talking about here. Is that the keys for unlocking.
And that each individual learner deserves a pathway to success. And we don't have that built into the existing traditional model. There's no reason why each learner can't assume they're going to be successful as long as they have the talent, the skill, the ability that we talked about previously. I'd like to interject a very brief story about one of the students that I worked with at one of the local universities. And she told me that they dropped out of school at their 3rd year because they hit a class that they just could not surmount. And I myself, knowing the instructor, know exactly what happened there. But what we don't want, and their comment was, I felt like a complete failure to myself, my family, and my friends. And so here was a student that made it all the way to the 3rd year, and they're feeling like a complete failure. They made tremendous advancements. It was the system that failed them. And so I think we need to constantly think about that learner and how do we assure them being successful. And if they can't be successful, then we might have some other issues that we can still attend to in order to not make them feel like a failure. I don't like a society where people feel like failures when they're trying to learn something.
Yeah, I think creating psychological safety is a key aspect. Seeing risk as or failure as a real negative thing is something that we've created and thrust upon them.
It's unfair. It's very unfair.
I totally agree. And also, like I say, we talk about it in C's and D's, but in terms of the UK system, is there a distinct difference in terms of somebody's knowledge between a 4 and a 5?
Right.
Or a 5 and a 6? But we use it as this benchmark of you get 1, you go on and you can progress to the next level. You get another and you can go onto the next level, but you have to pass go. Or you don't. You have to go to jail for a bit, and you were in education jail, should I say? Mm-hmm. You have to start at a different level and also go backwards in time. So if you're doing your GCSEs and you spent all of your time doing this, actually the next step is not to develop those skills, but focus on other things in terms of your development. It's then to go backwards and think, well, actually, we're going to start you on a level 1 or a level 2 rather than level 3.
Right.
But in a very very different subject. So take sport as an example, or anything in terms of vocational courses. Because you've maybe got 3s and 4s, it's the benchmark of actually you might not be good at something else. But really, is that a failure? Because you've never had the opportunity to, and maybe you did really, really well in the subject and just that one subject, and you just were a bit weaker at that point in some others. And we see it as a benchmark, and we make you start at a different point to everybody else rather than celebrating the successes.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
developing. Yeah, I find it fascinating. I think what we really need to focus on is focusing on progress and not passing, um, and making progress at different points. People will jump ahead. I was speaking to a relative, and they've got a young child, or somebody who's early into their schooling career, schooling journey, and they were saying, "Oh, she's been told that she's not doing well." I said, "Let me have a conversation. Let me see how we're getting on." I was like, "Let's just see where we're at in 6 months. Don't panic. Let's see where we're at, and let's see whether progress is can be really really quick at times." And rightly, she was constantly told that she wasn't doing well enough and everything else. 6 months later, she's absolutely flying. She's always been excelling in certain stuff, but she's absolutely flying in certain subjects. And I was like, progress happens at different rates for individuals, and I just
Exactly.
like I think we talked about this maybe years ago. I won't say months, but years ago, where we said, imagine a world maybe it happens differently in other countries, but imagine a world when you hit a certain point and say, by this point, you are going to sit your driving test, and everybody gets to that point and has to sit their driving test at exactly the same time, whether they feel prepared or not.
Hmm.
Nobody want
Exactly.
to drive on that day.
Yeah.
Literally, why can't they do it earlier? Why can't they do it later? Why can't we do it when they're ready and celebrate the fact that they're going to do it at some point, rather than putting them in a position knowing they're potentially going to fail because they are actively saying, "I'm probably not ready for this just yet."
Well,
Um,
and what I think is really important to us as a society and a species is to your point earlier about curiosity, we need to encourage and have a universal love of learning. And there's no better way to kill love of learning than to fail a student. No better way to do it. They'll walk away. They'll go do something different with their life that maybe they could have been remarkably successful. All we had to do is portray the information in a slightly different way. So yeah, that's of grave concern to me because we're losing, especially the generation that have been up to their eyeballs in digital technology their entire lives. They walk into a classroom where they're told to turn their cell phones off and listen to somebody for an hour standing in the front of the class, and they're bored out of their brains. It doesn't work, and yet then they fail, and now they hate school even even more than simply sitting in a boring classroom.
Yeah, for sure.
Lots to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm intrigued to look at this slide if we can.
Sure.
And for those watching, it's the absurdity of grades. It's called. I'd love you. I know we've talked a little bit about this, but this whole idea of this bell curve and the norm referencing, and I know that, that before we went on air, you talked about grades being just being
A
needing to
bad
go.
idea.
A bad idea, and we kind of touched on that a little bit. But I wonder if you could talk to that concept, because in the UK, and I know that it's not just in the UK, but in the UK, the grading system is like fundamental. Without it, the system collapses, which might not be a bad thing. But we saw in 2020. When the COVID restrictions happened, we had to go to teacher assessed grades, and then decided to do some some norm referencing against that, and it just became problematic. So that we ended up giving the teacher assessed grades in the end. It was a mess, and actually we were talking to somebody recently, Dennis Sherwood, and I've referenced him a couple of times recently, who wrote a book called Missing the Mark. And in this book, Missing the Mark, he said that Ofqual, our governing organisation across grading, said that every GCSE and A-level grade is accurate to within one grade. That means for every B grade, it could actually legitimate be an A grade or a C grade, which is just broken. And if I remember the numbers right, last year's GCSEs, the English GCSE, 250,000, 250,000 grades will have been wrong, based on those statistics, which suggests that I know I've just talked about what the absurdity of grades are, but I wonder if you could talk at that, just as we start thinking about close.
Well, I'll address this with two pieces. The first piece is we have to track back to the absurdity of all students being the same. And so somehow or another, the measurement system needs to reflect that bell curve, right? And you can skew that to the right or you can skew it to the left. But the bell curve is alive and well, unfortunately. And so you end up with students who might be forced into that lower grade level simply because the administration has already given the teacher a little bit of flack about all of their students are graduating with straight A's. But more importantly, what are the grade measures? We've talked about that briefly. You know, does an A student in algebra mean that they comprehend the topic comprehensively? They understand it conceptually. And this is a key point with me, a year from now, can they tell you what they learned? And the answer to most of those questions is generally no. So they're just an absurd measure. But if you think about where the origin of the so-called traditional classroom came from, this was an invention more or less around Horace Mann in the 1860s and 1870s, at least here stateside. That's got perpetuated globally, unfortunately. But you know, think about when this model was created, and it was before electricity, it was before indoor plumbing. Things have changed. So you're right, there is a lot of friction against replacing the grading system, but it has to be. There's no choice. And I'm wondering if the corporate structure, once again, people like Apple and Microsoft and Google will eventually start creating their own educational models so that they know that their new employees can be trusted with certain levels of competency. And once again, that scares the heck out of me.
But maybe their influence because of their need will shift and
Hopefully.
create a seismic shift in the rest of the education system, being forced into change,
Right.
knowing that if they don't get it right, somebody else will come in and create something, online courses, online learning, create their own schools. There are organisations that are already creating education organisations to prepare their learners or their future or their employees for the world that they actually need to prepare them for, rather than relying on the current system.
And maybe part of that is knowledge mapping, that we have a representative database of that individual's propensity, capacity, and retention levels. And there's a lot of work being done on knowledge mapping right now, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in terms of competency, the ability to think that you've achieved it rather than gone on a particular, like you said, once you know it or once you've done it, then that's enough. I think it was Germany. They created like a TAP model using some technology where every time that they'd seen a competency-based, obviously based on a competency-based framework, based on vocational education, but every time they'd seen it or witnessed it, anybody that's supporting that learner would just tap it on an app, and it would build a portfolio of competency taps that demonstrated that a person can do it. It didn't make a difference whether they could do it significantly better and they'd excelled in it. What they needed is, could somebody do that work?
Yeah, good point.
And then ultimately, when you get to interview and you get to a level, when you wanted to move up and you're no longer just performing activity, it's the next level to demonstrate high competency that moves you up the understanding, gets you paid more, all of these different wonderful things as you develop and you can attribute it. But ultimately, if they can do it 1,000 times, but the benchmark is 10, if they could do it wonderfully and they're so much smarter in it, but they could still do it the same amount of times, does it make a difference? We just need a competency-based support system as well to demonstrate something.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I think we've covered a lot. I've also enjoyed Ben furiously flickering through the slides. I have an unfound reflect for the government trying to say next slide, please. But no, just to clarify for anybody thinking, why is Ben finding it a struggle? These were completely mashed up, and Ben's done a wonderful job of not navigating 1, 2, 3, 4, not knowing where we need to go. Kim, you obviously provided them, and we really appreciate that.
I didn't know where we were going either, so that was part of it.
Yeah, no, I think, but you know what? Learning is not a straight line, and it's not.
Exactly.
Oh, see what you've done there, Steve.
Well done.
Absolutely. You know what? I've done form tonight. Maybe it's this Summer Fruits Robinsons that I'm drinking. It hasn't got a hint of vodka in it this night. So maybe that's why I'm doing better. But it's been a fascinating conversation. It's been wonderful to have you on, Kim, William, Gordon. And where can we find you? Where do we head to find more information out in regards to all these wonderful potential theories and everything else?
Well, two places. There is my website, the edtechresearchlabs.com. And then certainly a simple search on Kim William Gordon and LinkedIn. And I'd love to have the conversation. Let's keep talking. The more people that are talking about it, the more this is likely going to occur soon.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on. And
thanks
I'm
for the
sure
invitation.
our listeners will enjoy it as much as we have. So appreciate it, Kim.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
1, 2.